Welcome to this compilation of 4 sci-fi short stories that meddle and mess with the laws of physics. I'll be narrating Scent Makes a Difference by James Stamers, 30 Degrees Cattywonkus by James Bell, Two Worlds for One by George O. Smith, and Laboratory by Jerome Bixby. If you find yourself enjoying the stories, hit the like button to help it spread to more people, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always enjoy reading them. But for now, let's get to the stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Scent Makes a Difference by James Stamers. Narrated by William Skye. What I wanted was a good night's sleep. What I got was visitation rights with the most exasperating pack of sleepwalkers in history. A fried egg came floating up through the stone steps of the medical centre and broke on my shoe. According to my watch, it was time for the breakfast I didn't have that morning, so I waited a moment for the usual 2 rashers of bacon. When they materialised, I hopped aside to avoid them and went back into the building where the elevator took me straight up to the psychiatric floor without asking. Your blood pressure, salts, minerals, vitamins, basal metabolism, brain pattern, nervous reflexes, and skin temperature control are within accepted tolerances, it droned, opening the doors to let me off. You have no clinical organic disorders, you weigh 152 pounds, Earth, measure 6 feet 1 inch, and have a clear pallid complexion and an egg on your shoe. I walked down the corridor to Dr. Dougal, Spatio Psycho, please enter, and went determinedly in. Name, please, said the blonde receptionist, tapping her nail eroder. Jones. Harry Jones. Mr. Harry K. Jones, the physicist? Yes. Oh, no, she said, fiddling with the appointment list. Mr. Harry K. Jones has just had his morning appointment and left. I know, I said. An important piece of clinical data has just turned up. I have returned with an egg on my shoe. I think you better see the doctor. I sat down to wait and took the little bottle of pills from my pocket. From the galaxy to you, through Dr. Dougal, Spatio Psycho, it said on the label. The last word in tranquilizers. Conservative Zen methods only, appointments any hour, first consultation free, no obligation. Call personal transmitter DDK 51212-6790, Earth. Active ingredients, oxylatohydrobenzoic thiophenophenone, sugar, colouring to 100%. The inner office door opened, and Dr. Dougal smiled fatly at me from behind his expensive desk. Do come in, he called, and tell me all about it. It's happened again, I said, going into his office. Well, why not if you feel that way? Nurse, bring me Mr. Hinghump's case history. Mr. Harry K. Jones's film is in the transcriber, Doctor, said the receptionist. Mr. Jones, the physicist. Ah, yes, of course. Please sit down, Mr. Jones. Now, what exactly is the trouble? Hold nothing back. Tell me all. Reveal your intimate thoughts. The main entrance just served me the breakfast that your diet forbids, I said, sitting down. Plain case of wish fulfillment. Put it down to poltergeists, Mr. Jones. And what exactly do you mean by that? Well now, Dr. Dougal said, drumming his fat fingers. I don't think we need to go into technicalities, Mr. Jones. Look, I said firmly, I came to you to get a quiet night's sleep. No more insomnia, you said. Leave your problems in the laboratory. Let not the nuclei banish sleep. Work hard, sleep hard, take tranquilizers, and enjoy the useful recuperation of the daily wear on body tissues, deep, dreamless sleep of the innocent. He looked at me suspiciously. It sounds like the sort of advice I might have given, he admitted. Well, at least I managed to keep my dreams in my head until I started your treatment. I have an urgent problem to solve that vitally affects national security. I can't have this sort of thing happening in the middle of an experiment. I pointed to the fried egg on my shoe and shook it off on the pile of his green carpet. Yes, well, he said, peering over the desk at it. If you feel that strongly, Mr. Jones, perhaps you'd better give up the diet and just take the pills. I want to know how it happens, I said, and I settled firmly into the consulting chair. Dr. Dougal coughed professionally. Of course. You are an intelligent man, Mr. Jones. One of our leading physical scientists. Naturally, you wish to know the precise mechanism of such phenomena. Very commendable and entirely natural. Think no more about it. Dr. Dougal, do you know what you are doing? Spatio-psycho is still in its early stages, Mr. Jones. You are really privileged to be a pioneer, you know. We have had some most interesting results with that new tranquilizer. I hope you're not losing faith, Mr. Jones. I accept the orthodox philosophy of spatio-psycho. It is only the basic philosophy of China or Zen, and I had the routine scientific education naturally. Ah, said Dr. Dougal with rapture. The substratum of the universe is no mind, and thus all material things are in constant unimpeded mutual solution. G.G. Mooj, the appleness of an apple is indistinguishable from the cupness of a cup. And an egg on the shoe is the breakfast I didn't have, I said. Here, he said, I think those pills are sending your sleeping mind down beyond the purely personal level of your own emotions and subconscious cerebrations. Take these in a little water half an hour before going to bed. I stood up and walked over to the door. What are they? I asked. Same as before, only stronger. Should send you right down to the root of things. Pass quiet nights in no mind, Mr. Jones. Sleep beyond the trammels of self. Support yourself on the universal calm sea of no mind. If these don't work, there'll be no fee, I told him. I took 3 of the stronger pills that night, turned off the light and lay back in bed, waiting for sleep to come and get me. The antiseptic odour of the medical centre recalled itself, but nothing else happened, and I was still waiting to go to sleep when I woke up next morning. No dreams of a breakfast I couldn't eat. No dreams at all. I had been smelling the memory of formaldehyde and just slid off to sleep. I could still smell it, for that matter, as if it were coming from the slightly open bedroom window. I looked up. Hello, said the tall, skinny man in a doctor's coat on the windowsill. Hello yourself, I said. Go away, I'm awake. Yes, you are. At least I assume you are. But I'm not. I sat up and looked at him, and he obligingly turned his head to profile against the brightness of the window. He had a sharp, beaky face that was familiar. Haven't we met somewhere? I asked. Certainly, he said in a slightly affected voice. Well? I don't know your name, he said, but I have a very important post-operative case at present, and you keep charging around the ward when you're asleep. I just came over as soon as I could get a few hours sleep myself to ask you to stop doing it if you don't mind. I've done no such thing. You were doing it all last night, my friend. I was not, I said. I spent last night here in my own bed. I didn't even dream. Ah, that probably accounts for it. Tell me, do you take drugs, tranquilizers, by any chance? We've had a lot of trouble with that. They seem to cause a bubble in the sequence of probabilities and things shift about. I've been taking a new one myself while this case is on. I suspect that although I'm dreaming you, I think you are not asleep at all. At least I wasn't when you made all that noise in my ward last night. No, I'm awake, I said. Very much so. I see. Well, I shall wake up soon myself and go back to my own world, of course. But while I'm here, I suppose you haven't any advanced works on post-operative hyperspace relapse? Pity, he said as I shook my head. I suppose you have no information on the fourth octave of ultra-uranium elements? He shook his head. Didn't even know they existed, he said. I don't believe they do in my probable time. What are you, a physicist? Ah, he added as I nodded. I wanted to specialise in physics when I was in college, but I went in for medicine instead. So did I said. Medicine, I mean, but I never passed pharmacology with all those confusing extraterrestrial derivatives. Really? He said interestedly. It's my weakest subject too. I'm a pretty good surgeon, but an awful fool with medications. I suppose that's how we got together. You won't come busting up the ward again, will you? I'd like to be obliging, but if I don't dream and I don't know where I am when I'm asleep, I don't see what I can do to stop it. It's not as if I'm really there, is it? He crossed his arms and frowned at me. Look, he said, in my probable time, you're as much physically there as I am now in your time here. I'll prove it. I know I'm asleep in the emergency surgeon's room in my hospital. You know you're awake in your bedroom. He held out his hand and walked across the floor to me. My name's Jones, he said. So's mine, I answered, shaking his solid hand. This must be a very vivid dream to you. We smiled at each other, and as he turned away, I caught sight of his reflection in the wall mirror beside my hairbrush on the cabinet. Good heavens, I said. In a mirror you look exactly like me. Is your name Harry Jones? He stopped, walked over to the mirror, and moved about until he could see me in it. Harold K. Jones, he said. You've got the face I shave every morning, but I've only just recognised you. You're me. I prefer to think you are me, I said. So you did fail that final pharmacology exam, eh? And I didn't, in my probability. Well, I must admit it seemed more probable I would fail at the time, but I passed. It was that tramp Kate's fault. She said yes too easily. He coughed and looked at his fingers. She said no to me. And as a matter of fact, after I passed, I married her. She's my wife. I'm sorry, I meant nothing personal. You never married? I never really got over Kate, I said. I wonder what would have happened if I had qualified and then not married her. You mean, what did happen to the Harry K. Jones who passed in pharmacology but did not marry Kate? He must be around in another probability somewhere, the same as we are. Good heavens, I shouted. Somewhere I may have solved the fourth octave equation. You're right, Harry. And I may have found out how to get hyperspace relapse under control. Harold, I said, this is momentous. It is more probable that you, I, and I, you, will make a mess of things, but there must be other probability sequences where we are successful. And we can get to them, he shouted, jumping up. Are you using oxylatohydrobenzoic phenopheno? Something like that. 3 pills last thing at night? Yes. Ever have foreign bodies materialise into your time-space? Several breakfasts, I said. The last egg was yesterday on my shoe. It was Virginia ham with me, so I stopped dieting and increased the dosage. So did I said. I suppose, apart from major points where a whole probability branches off, we lead much the same lives. But eggs don't dream. How did the ham get into your waking world? Harry, really? I have a tendency to jump to conclusions which you must control. How do you know eggs don't dream? I would have thought, though, that a pig was peculiarly liable to the nightmare that it will end up as a rasher, any reasonably observant pig, that is. But I don't think that is necessary. Obviously, we are dipping down to a stratum where things coexist in fact, and not merely one in fact and the other in mind, or one probability and not its twin alternative. Now, how do I get hold of the me that solved this hyperspace relapse business? And I the ultra-uranium octave relationship, I added. Look out, he said. I'm waking up. Goodbye, Harry. Look after myself. He flickered, paused in recovery, and then faded insubstantially away. I looked around my empty bedroom. Then, because it was time to go to work at the laboratory, I shaved, dressed, and left my apartment as usual. Some high brass and politicians had been visiting the laboratory, showing off to their females how they were important enough to visit the top-secret bomb-proving labs, and the thick perfume was hanging in the sealed rooms like a damp curtain. I wish they wouldn't bring women into the unventilated labs, I grumbled to my assistant. Never mind, Chief. If you can make this bomb work, they'll let you build your own lab in the Nevada desert with no roads to it. Have you found the solution? I'll tell you when I have, I said, but I do have a new approach to the problem. And as soon as I could, I left the labs and went back to my apartment downtown, took 3 pills, and lay still, waiting for sleep. I could not get the smell of that perfume in the lab out of my nose. It was a heavy gardenia plus whatnot odour. I woke up in the middle of the night with the perfume still clinging to the air. The room was dark and I crossed my fingers as I leaned over to turn on the bedside lamp. If mental concentration on all the possible errors in my work was the key, the successful me should be here in the room, snatched from his own segment of probability. I turned on the light. There was no one else in the room. Hell, I said. Perhaps it just meant he, or that me, was not asleep, or was perversely not using tranquilizers. Or didn't that matter? No, I controlled this alone and had gone wrong. Did you say something, Harry? Asked Kate, stepping out of the bathroom and pulling the top of her nightgown into, I guess, place. Ooh, fancy dreaming about you. This is odd. I sat up and covered myself protectively in the bedsheets. Look, Kate, I said, I don't want to see you. I'm not your husband, really. He's a pleasant fellow. I met him today, and he's not me. I never became a doctor. No doubt you remember what I was doing instead of studying. That was a mistake, for she came and sat on the edge of the bed and ran her fingers into my hair. I thought it was odd I should dream about my husband, she said. I'll believe you because I don't know how I got here, and you do look like the Harry I used to know, before he went all high scientific surgeon and no time for fun. She curved more fully than she had when she was 18, but there was neat symmetry to her sign formulae, and she still had blonde hair. Her perfume was the same as the one in the lab I had been smelling all day. It was now reaching me at high amperage. So that was the key, the evocative power of smell association. I sniffed deeply at the perfume in appreciation. Like it? Kate asked, wriggling. Only for its scientific values, I said. It suggests a most valuable line of research. I'm in favour, she said, and pressed me to the bed. Your husband is coming, I shouted, and it worked. She disappeared. Presumably she woke up in her own probability time-space. and no doubt Kate's reflexes by now were trained to snap her awake and away at the suggestion that her husband was around. It was highly improbable that Kate would alter much. I got up to make myself some coffee. There was no point in wasting sleep without a plan. Clearly, I had to take the pills and fix the appropriate smell in my mind, and when I woke up, I would drag the proper slice of another probability with me. And then I would interview the me who had solved the ultra-uranium heavy element equation. And the bomb to end all bombs would be perfected. The test was ready, waiting for me to say, "Let's go, boys, we know what will happen this time." But there was, it struck me, the difficulty of finding the right scent to evoke the right probable me. I collected all the toothpaste, deodorant, shaving stick, aftershave lotion I could find in the bathroom and started on the toothpaste. I inhaled deeply and lay down, with the first tube on my chest. But after the coffee, I slept very briefly, and when I looked up there was only a toothbrush on the carpet. It was not mine in this world, and I had no idea whose it was, or rather which probable me it belonged to. But at least this established the principle. The smell produced the object, and if I went deep enough in sleep, it would produce the whole Jones. I dressed quickly and went out for a walk in the night air, breathing deeply and memorizing every scent I came across. Then I went back to the apartment, sniffed hard at the row of personal unguents, and lay down to sleep. When I woke up, it was morning, and the room was full of people. There were about a dozen of me, some wearing very odd clothes, some scowling, others grinning unbecomingly, and some looking just plain stupid. "Gentlemen," I said, standing up on my bed, "I am sorry to disturb your dreams, but a matter of vital consequence has made me call you all here. I am Harry, or Harold K. Jones, and I became a physicist. I need your help. Do any of you know anything about the octaves of elements beyond uranium?" There was a babble through which I heard chiefly, "The man's mad. He says he's me. Who are you, anyway?" "No, you're not. I'm Jones." "Please, gentlemen," I said, "I don't expect we have much time before some of you wake up in your own probability. You, sir, in the armchair. Yes, you in the tight pants. How about you?" "Me?" he said. "I'm Captain Jones, 3rd Vector Space Fleet, engineer rank. Who the galactic helix are you, eh?" Even from the bed I could detect the smell of sweat and grease from his working uniform. "I suppose you took up flight engineering at high school," I suggested. "Quite right," he snapped. An early deviation, obviously. I remembered being enthralled with the arrival when I was a kid of the early space rockets, but my enthusiasm was daunted by old Burchell, who made us stick to airplanes. Obviously, his was not. "How about you?" I asked, pointing to the thinnest me in the room. "Penal colony on Arcturus," he said. "Eternal labour." "Oh, I'm sorry. I wonder which time... Well, how many physicists are there here, or physical chemists, or astronomers, or even general scientists?" I walked around the room, detecting toothpaste brands A, B, C, and White Brighter, and a range of toilet preparations with manly odours, contributing to our popularity with friends, relatives, girls, and bosses, but no other physicist. Not a trace of research in my line. And 1 or 2 of them were already showing signs of waking up elsewhere and disappearing from the room. I was about to start tracing it back to the point when I abandoned a medical career, and I could still smell the formaldehyde, when Dr. Harold K. Jones appeared. "Look," he said, "I want you to keep away from Kate. Perhaps I didn't make that clear yesterday. Good heavens, where did you get all of these me from? Does anyone here know anything about post-operative hyperspace relapse?" Disgustedly, I saw that more than half of them did. Perhaps I should have been a doctor after all. The probabilities were heavily represented in medicine. I sat on the bed and stared at my toes while the doctors babbled excitedly together. I gathered that Dr. Harold K. Jones had solved his problem anyway. "Excuse me," said a thoughtful me in a very quiet voice. "I didn't want to make myself obtrusive, but I did do a certain amount of research on the theoretical possibilities of elements heavier than uranium. It seemed to me that they might go on being discovered almost indefinitely." "They are," I said quickly. "Octave after octave of them. Tell me about it, please." "Look," he said, "it was only an idea. I really specialized in biochemistry, but we do use trace elements, and the formula I worked out at the time was... let me see." "Please try to remember," I said. "Ah, yes, it was this," he said, and the strain of remembering woke him up and he disappeared back to his own probability. "This was damned well planned, Harry," said Dr. Harold K. Jones enthusiastically. "I think we can save hundreds of people every year now. I always knew I had it in me." "Listen, Jones," said Captain Jones of the 3rd Vector Space Fleet, pushing himself through the crowd. "I've been talking to 1 or 2 of the others, see, and if you have the galactic gall to disturb my sleep again, I'm going to blast you. Is that clear?" "Perfectly," I said. "It's tricky out in space, you know. No hard feelings, but the fraction of a micro error and poof. You see what I mean? I must get a sound sleep at stand down." "Don't forget what I said about Kate," Dr. Harold K. Jones remembered to warn me. "I know how to do it too, and you can have an accident with my instruments easily." He disappeared. I watched as the others woke up and went, one by one, even the fellow from Arctus, until they were all gone and I was alone with dark thoughts on heavy elements. It was so improbable that I was the only me who had worked on these lines, and very probable that if 2 of us with similar minds did work on the same problem, we could between us find the answer. Look at Dr. Jones and his hyperspace relapse. Thinking of Dr. Jones made me think of Kate, and I fell asleep again with the memory of her scent in my head, as if I were really smelling it. When I woke up again, halfway through the morning, there she was in my room. She was at least dressed this time, but she smiled familiarly at me. "For God's sake, Kate," I said, "go back to your husband." She began to cry. "Oh, Harold Kin," she said, "I'm so glad to see you. I must be dreaming because I know you're dead, but I've kept everything just the way it was. Look, I haven't even touched your messy desk." "Are you sitting in a room?" I asked. "I'm in your study, Harold Kin," she said, surprised. "Can't you see?" "No, as a matter of fact, I can't." "Oh, then I can throw out all these old papers?" "What old papers?" "Oh, I don't know, Harold Kin," Kate said. "You made such a fuss about failing that silly medical exam that you never let me touch your desk when you graduated in physics." "Physics?" "Yes," said Kate, throwing paper after paper onto the carpet. She made sweeping motions in the air and dumped a mass of notes into her lap. They appeared on her fingertips, but they stayed in existence when she dropped them on the carpet. "How did I die?" I asked, bending down and thumbing rapidly over the papers. "A bomb went off," she said. "I really don't want to talk about it. But you were so eminent, Harold Kin." I must have been very soft in the discrimination to have allowed that revolting nickname, I thought, but it was clear from the papers I was holding that I knew my physics. And there it was, printed in an issue of the Commission's journal that never existed in my time-space, the whole equation I was looking for. It was so obvious when I read it that I could not understand how I failed to think of it for myself. For my own myself, that is. When I looked up, this probable Kate had gone. I wanted to thank her, but the evening would do. Meanwhile, here was the ultra-uranium fourth octave equation. I called the laboratory, read it off to my assistant, and told him to get on with the test. Right, Chief. I'll go down myself and give you a report when I get back. I said fine and took the rest of the day off. It was the peak of my career so far, and from the widow Kate's comments, it seemed as if I had a great probable career to come. Of course, I would have to redouble our safety precautions at the labs, and it would be best if I never went near the proving grounds. That other physicist me probably made some error that I would avoid being forewarned. By evening, I decided to try to locate that probable Kate again, to thank her, and to find out exactly how that poor me blew himself up with a bomb. With care, I recalled the perfume and also the musty smell of the papers, for I did not want Dr. Harold K. Jones's Kate appearing. Then I removed all other odoriferous substances from the bedroom, took 3 pills, and was about to lie down to sleep when my assistant called to report on the test. That you, Chief? What a success! We're made! Your name's in lights, Chief. It was the most colossal explosion I've ever seen. It burned the area like toast. It even smelled like toast with a touch of ozone and sulfur. Very strong smell. Stop! I screamed. Stop! But it was too late. I could smell it clearly as he had described it. And now the pills are working. How in the name of heaven am I going to stay awake? Because once I fall asleep... "30 Degrees Cattywonkus" by James Bell. Narrated by William Skye. It doesn't take a heap of leaving to make any house a nightmare. One vanishing door will do nastily. It was a tremendous house, and they were newlyweds, and were still a mite flighty. And for a while that accounted for the whole thing. At the moment it seemed to Ernie Lane that in a house which even the real estate agent said had either 11 or 12 rooms, it was quite conceivable that he and Melanie had overlooked that extra room. After all, they had only been living at 1312 Cedar Lane for 4 days, and had hardly had time to make a complete survey of the place. Now it was quite different, for Ernie Lane had stopped walking hurriedly past that extra door, had stopped giving it only casual curiosity, had even stopped wondering afterward. This night he had come home a bit tired, gone directly to greet his loving wife, and then decided to put a stop to the gnawing question. While Melanie fried the chicken, Ernie walked carefully and wordlessly to the dim hallway. He went past the staircase, past the telephone, to the darkest spot between the living room and the study. He stood for a strange moment. There was no extra door. He felt the refinished wall, his fingertips searching for hidden panels. There was none. "Supper's ready," Melanie called. "Ernie?" But it had been there last night, the night before that, and the very first night the real estate agent brought them over. In fact, he recalled, that was the reason the agent had been uncertain about the number of rooms. And why had he passed it off as a joke, simply turning from the extra door without opening it? Ernie felt again. It was ceasing to be a joke. He was not a man of hallucinations. He was not a victim of superstition, fear, or near-sightedness. He only wanted to know why he saw a door one day and didn't see it the next. He called a comforting word to his wife, then reached for the telephone book. He found the name of Hartley and Hartley Real Estate, Plaza 06633. Without any undue commotion, he dialed. In a moment, a woman's voice at the other end seemed to barge into his life. "Special operator, number please." "Plaza 06633. "Sorry, sir, we have no such number." Ernie let a disgruntled voice thunder into the phone. "Then what the heck is Hartley and Hartley Realty doing with it?" A pause. Then she replied, "Sir, we have no Hartley and Hartley." "Don't be silly," he said. "I just found it in the phone book." She answered, "We have a Hartfield and Hatley Realtors Inc., sir, but no Hartley and Hartley. Their number is in the directory." Melanie was standing behind him. "Who are you calling?" He was shaken, but he managed to appear calm as he hung up. He even relaxed against the wall. "I was trying to get the real estate agent on the phone. These lights ought to be brighter, and I thought he could refer us to his electrician." "His what?" Melanie asked. He halted. "Never mind, honey. I'm beat. Rough day. I need fried chicken." He hugged his trim, prim wife, and they walked toward the kitchen arm in arm. But it was not until they settled at the table that he saw, under the bright electric light, that her hair was red, not blonde, and he immediately felt he'd been gypped. Her smirky little voice added to the shock. "Darling, don't call me Melanie when my name is Marcia. It just isn't done." On purpose, Ernie spent an uneventful evening, arose the next morning, ignored his wife's red hair, conveniently forgot her name, avoided even checking to see if the door was there, and saved up a sneer for the telephone. During the day, his business life was perfect. He got the Jenkins account, lunched with the boss, and was asked to serve on the membership committee in the Chamber of Commerce drive. However, during the afternoon he developed a terrific headache and excused himself from the office long enough to see the company physician. The thin, foxy doctor handed him a pill and a glass of water. After Ernie had swallowed the pill politely, the physician leaned forward and gazed at his eyes and forehead. "Tell me, Lane, you're a newlywed, aren't you?" Ernie nodded. "Then why the worried frown? You seem to be carrying the Rock of Gibraltar on your shoulders. Is your job too much for you?" "Of course not," Ernie said, smiling. "I told you I had a headache." "Perhaps," the doctor said, smiling back. "You seemed to have been in something of a prepossessed state when you came in. I was just curious." Ernie laughed it off and at the doctor's request lay on a cot for a period of 10 minutes. When he returned to the office, there was a request that he call her Marcia. The sudden venomous thoughts of the evening before spun before his eyes. What the devil was going on with the woman? The new name, the new hairdo, the new smirk in her voice, that wasn't the woman he married. He grabbed the phone and called home. 20 rings. No answer. It was 3:45 when the switchboard notified him that his wife was on the line. "Hello, Ernie. This is Melanie. I'm at the Lee Hat Shop. Can you meet me in half an hour? I want to do some shopping and I thought we'd have supper and maybe see a movie." Melanie? It was all like a breath of spring. Away from that house, she was a different person. Happily, he agreed to buying her a new hat, supper, and a ticket to Lowe's State. For Melanie, anything. For Marcia, nothing. And when they met, surely enough, her hair was blonde again, and the smirk in her voice was gone. She was his bride, and he forgot whatever the past, present, or future might hold. The future, however, was not long coming. After the movie, they returned home and were about to settle down when, passing along the hallway, Ernie looked over his shoulder and saw the extra door. Quickly, he reached past Melanie and grasped the knob with his hand. "Ernie, what on earth?" She startled him. He laughed, and they went into bed. It was around 1 a.m. when Ernie decided he would not be able to put off any longer the chore of exploring that hall door. It plainly had not been there the night before. It plainly was there tonight. He tiptoed softly from bed and left the room. Melanie did not even stir. He closed the door lightly and cat-footed his way through the darkness to the wall switch at the foot of the stairs. Stealthily looking all about him, as if someone or something might suddenly try to stop him, Ernie sneaked up on the door. He grabbed the knob with both hands, turned it briskly, and the door swung open. The pale green wall of the hallway confronted him. It was as if the door were merely hinged onto the wall. No opening whatever. He tapped it with his knuckles. Then he examined the door. It was a French-style thing extending from floor to ceiling with contrasting green slats. Identical with those appearing all along the hallways, most of them closet doors. Just for the heck of it, he thought he would drag out a hammer and uncork the screws holding the false door, carry it to some conspicuous place and observe it as it went through its next disappearing act. But as he turned to head for the tool cabinet, Ernie heard the din of distant shouting, as if a room full of men were playing cards. And yet not so distant. For a moment, the world became silent. Ernie pressed an ear against the wall behind the false doorway. It seemed to be coming from inside, and there were only a few words of any audible clarity. Maximum, not much longer, and logarithms. Ernie tried the adjacent door. It opened into a small storage room, unlighted. He felt around the wall panelling, but no switch. Gauging the dimensions, it seemed to him that the storage room practically accounted for all the space behind the hall. If the fake door opened onto a room, it could only be this room, and there was nothing here. He listened. No sound inside the confines of the room. But the moment he returned, pressed his ear against the outer wall, Ernie heard them shouting again. It was as if the wall were 12 inches thick, as if he were not hearing anything at all, and yet hearing. The thought struck him. There was a laundry chute opening from the second floor to the storage room. Provided they wanted to install a chute. Meanwhile, the agent had told him, it would remain just a hole in the floor. He and Melanie had not made any plans for developing the second floor. It was evident that his mother would one day have to live with them, and her own invalid sister in time. And then whatever children there might be. But so far, he and Melanie had actually made only one trip up there with the agent. In fact, there was no electrical connection to the upstairs whatever. Ernie remembered the layout, however, and made his way up the stairs that creaked in defiance of the agent's compliments. When he reached the top in pitch blackness, He felt for the wall. A strange coldness, not at all common to the summer season, moved out along the hallway. It seemed to hover around him, curious of the intruder. Imagination. He walked on, an inch at a time, for he remembered a small table about halfway along. But he never felt the table. Ernie reached the end of the hall before he was sure. And where had the table gone? He returned along the opposite wall until he felt the small square panelling. Then a brass knob. He pulled it open, half expecting the end of the world. And at that point, a bluish haze filled with gaseous, luminous smoke rose out and blinded him. When the obnoxious odour of the smoke was gone, he took a deep breath and stuck his head in again. Directly below him sat 3 men, fat and jovial, shaking their pipes at one another. There was a row of red and white lighted tubes, not unlike fluorescents, a mahogany-like counter that might pass for a bar, and a row of bottles against a mirror. The dimensions immediately struck Ernie as all wrong. It was far bigger than the hall closet where it was supposed to be. In fact, the portion he saw seemed to be the focal point of a large dance hall or bar room. But the most obvious quality of the scene was the tilted floor. The whole thing seemed to be about 30 degrees lopsided. Ernie could go immediately back to bed and tell of his dream tomorrow, or he could make things worse by yelling at the men below. It wasn't necessary to yell. As if they had seen him through the tops of their balding heads, they motioned to the bartender, then pointed squarely at his vantage point. Ernie felt the quavering impulse to run, and yet even in a nightmare you try desperately to learn the ending. The man in the white coat set the ladder firmly against the floor so that the top ended in the slightest kind of tilt near the chute door. It was not Ernie's intention to crawl through the door, but the way the man motioned, and the way the men turned briefly and waved, simply as if they might be old acquaintances waiting for him in a hotel lobby, it was, to say the very least, overwhelming. There was a fragrance, an allure about the room. It smelled of apples and tobacco, and brought nostalgic thoughts of college days and faint wisps of the past that were not nostalgic. He thought of Melanie. He really ought to tell her about this. The chalky finger motioning at him, the unconcerned old men on the sofa, and the table. It was the antique table, missing from the upstairs hall, that lured him in. There it sat against the far wall. He grabbed a jutting 2x4 and twisted his body through the opening. The ladder must have been shoved to one side, or perhaps it was the claustrophobic effect of going through the small opening. Anyway, something. It turned his mind, his body, wrong side out. Like the squeezing out of a wet mop by a steamroller. At the foot of the ladder, the man in the bartender's jacket led him to the 3 men. One of them, exceptionally fat, jovial, excused himself politely and took Ernie aside. "You look pale, Ernie," he said. "Having trouble?" Groggily, Ernie looked about him. "It's this room. It's lopsided. I think a good 30 degrees Cattywonkus." The man doused a cigar and a quick frown crossed his brow. "Good point. Very good point. Come with me, Ernie." Ernie looked. The other men paid him no mind. The little man waddled through a maze of foundation columns as if the whole world were suspended above them. He walked behind the bar to a small glass-encased desk, U-shaped and covered with dials, all reading A, B, C, D. "Cronkite!" the man called. A whirring inside the room shut off. A man with goggles and a metal halo stuck his head out the door. "Cronkite, Ernie here says we're 30 degrees off. Can you shift the equilibrium? Frankly, I hadn't noticed it." With a silent nod, the man named Cronkite shut the transparent door, turned 3 knobs, a bell clanged, and the floor of the whole affair sank some 30 degrees on one side, rose 30 on the other. Then the whirring in the chamber resumed, and Ernie was led back to the bar. "Have yourself a drink, man," his host coaxed. "I don't need one," Ernie said. "Listen, before we go on, just one question." The man smiled pleasantly. "Where the heck am I? And what is this going on in my basement?" The smile continued. It was maddening. "Well," said Ernie. "You are here," the man finally said. "And don't be silly, Ernie. Your house has no basement." Ernie turned to the bartender. "I think I will have a drink." "Make it a triple," the little man called, and the bartender smiled as if his face hurt. There was a pained expression on Ernie. He sank his head into his arms. "Cheer up," the man said. "It isn't worth all that." "What isn't?" "Be happy, man." "I'll be happy when I get out of here, but I'll be hilarious when I find out the score, and I plan to be hilarious before I get happy. Is that clear?" "You talk as if you had been drinking already, man. Snap out of it." "I like men with clear heads." It was not only a delaying tactic, Ernie thought. It was plainly a case of nerve-busting. They were going to force it out of him. He had already conceded they were not a gang of thieves using his basement for a hideaway. They were not digging a secret tunnel for the Defense Department. "You like men with clear heads? What am I, some sort of recruit?" "Now," the man exclaimed, suddenly thrust into a new frame of mind. "We are now on the same plane. You are a recruit, and we can understand each other now. So, where is this?" "This is your house, of course, but we're not quite there yet. We're in what you would call, another dimension." Ernie reached for the drink and sniffed it. Its smell fitted the situation. "And what does that mean?" "Oh, you and I have lived in the same vicinity all our lives, even crossed each other's paths. But we are in different dimensions, different worlds in the same place." "You mean like Mars and Earth?" "I mean like Mars in Earth, or vice versa," the man answered. Ernie jumped up and started for the ladder. "I'm getting out of here." "Don't be a fool. Climb that ladder and you'll butt your skull in." "I came through the hatch. I'll leave through the hatch." "But we've shifted 30 degrees. You told us to. Now the top of the ladder is 30 degrees away from the door of the laundry chute, which is quite impossible to reach, my friend, because there is perhaps dirt and a foundation and everything else in the way. We'd have to tear out our own structure and gouge into yours. This we cannot do. Too expensive." Ernie had heard enough. He climbed the ladder to the top, butted his head, and climbed down. "Okay, you win. What's the score?" "You and Marcia," the man said. "Melanie," Ernie corrected. "Melanie in your dimension, Marcia in ours. You and she exist in our dimension as well. Same type, same characteristics inwardly, but not the same outwardly. Different hair, different name. Your own features were to be slightly different here. Ernie sat down on the sofa beside the two old men. He buried his head. This is the other dimension? Then where is the other me? Oh no, his host said. This is not the other dimension. This is the experimental dimension. You are from the second. What we are both in is a third realm sponsored by the government, the federal government of the Unison States. Congress sponsored this scientific investigation, provided we could accomplish it before the session ends. The first desire to laugh at the stupidity of the nightmare grappled with Ernie. But when he looked at that ladder and remembered the bump on his head, he knew this was not the time or place for a nightmare. The man went on. So we talked Senatore Jumfries into wielding his might in committee. The Committee on Extra-Dimensional Perception talked to the President Eisenhowervelt. He addressed the Congress, and by the single vote of Demo Rep Martini, this thing was financed for short duration. Ernie opened his eyes and looked beyond the bar and the experimental lab. It was like the inside of a giant ship in space or a vessel ploughing the Pacific. It spread into distant chasms of darkness. Our object, of course, is to start out the new dimension with an Adam and Eve, the host said. Ernie sneered. You think you can start a new world? Oh, we've begun it. And we chose your home because here you are, two young newlyweds just starting out in life, not too concerned that the future holds nothing more for you than junior assistant to the vice president ever. Here you have more chances for development, advancement, and enjoyment. We have effected changes. Your Melanie, for example. You and Marcia will run this dimension. You and she will. We will not, and I'm going to Melanie now. Let me out of here. The man politely hid a laugh. Dear sir, I assure you there is no way out of the dimension. You are trapped. You must remain now, regardless, and conduct our experiment for us. You got through to our world to find out about us, Ernie said. How can you keep me here? But we entered your world from our own dimension. Our people pass back and forth all the time, unknown to your people. But from this special contraption which Congress has rigged up for us, there is no immediate escape. Ernie got mad. Then what the devil are these people doing here? Shh, the man said. Those are our Congress observers. He seemed extremely disturbed. Don't let them know how you feel. They get angry at people who take them on wild goose chases. There was a sudden feeling of hope that Ernie held a monkey wrench in his hand. First, he would find out all about the thing, then he would raise Hail Columbia to the two Congress observers and get them to thumbs down the experiment. Then, if there was an ounce of humaneness in them, they would free him. Okay, I'll calm down, but let me know the rest. When will I see Melanie? Marcia, the man said firmly, will be along shortly. We must first lift the initial dimension prototype to the exact level of your house. Every coordinate must match each stick of furniture in your own dimension. Then we can begin working outward. Working outward? From your house. It is to be the beginning of this, civilization you and Marcia are to create. You will observe in each direction there is still darkness. When we have manipulated the realm into the exact position of the ground floor of your house, we will install a series of transitional burnouts. These will break down molecular resistance which our more powerful equipment creates on solid portions of your house. Everything will fit into place, and you and Marcia will report to us regularly." Ernie was fuming. "Then we are your prisoners?" "Oh, but you'll enjoy every minute of it. We created the origin, the nucleus, in the home of some newlywed in your dimension for the mere purpose of convenience of adaptability. We will bring in teams who will plant ersatz crops, trees, cut streams, create weather, put life into the whole place. With your dimension's home and our dimension's scientific advantages, you can have full reign of populating a wonderful new world." Ernie was madder than he had ever remembered. "And if I refuse?" "You can't refuse. Marcia will be here momentarily. We have been experimenting with her changes in hair, mood, expression. We hypnotized her on occasions. The extra door in the hallways? Sooner or later she will see it, wonder as you did, and open it. This time we will have the magnetic field force turned on. You see, Ernie, you came in the wrong way, and here he paused abruptly. Quite a problem has been posed." "I'll say it has." "Yes, you see, you were supposed to come through the door, and you still will, but there was a technical miscalculation in our instruments which, while allowing you to enter this new dimension, also did not allow you to enter. You yourself suggested we correct by 30 whole degrees. Well, we are not set up for more than one field force entrance per person. The Congress didn't allot us that much money." Ernie's eyes grew wild and bright. "So, technically, I'm not even here?" "Technically, your other self is still up by the laundry chute looking in or going back to bed or whatever." He scratched his balding head. "Really an unfortunate event. For when the other you enters our hallway door, we shall have to do away with one of you. It would not only frighten Marcia, but the federal government would accuse us of waste, corruption, and heaven knows what else." The wildness in Ernie's eyes turned into a gleam. "You mean your government just wouldn't understand?" "Right," the man said unhappily. "There's more politics in science than you'd ever believe possible. Mister, I think I have a solution." "You have?" Ernie walked to the bar, grabbed an armful of magnums, then walked to the plastic experimental table, flung open the door, slung bottle after bottle at the instruments, caused 3 small explosions, a sputtering red fire, a terrible burst of black smoke, and a sudden explosion that turned the whole new dimension, such as it was, into a white blinding sun. When the nausea left, he saw the bodies lying on a green, grassy area in what seemed to be Washington, D.C. He made his way in torn pajamas to Unison Station, paid a man to go out and buy him a second-hand suit by giving up his gold wedding band, then found the senatorial office building, located the office of the Senatori of Iowaki, as he had planned to do, and asked for permission to enter the other dimension to take home movies. The Senatori asked him the name of his hometown, accused him of lisping it, handed him a year's free pass to Otherworld, and a 2-year pass to the Senatorial in session. Ernie, following instructions on the card, walked to a little white building near the Washingable Monument, stepped inside, handed a man his Otherworld card, then walked through a door, felt sick at his stomach, came out to the streetcar line to Melanie and home. When he got there, it was almost daylight and the front door was locked. He climbed through an upstairs window, looked through the laundry chute, saw nothing, and returned to his bed. Melanie was still sleeping soundly. He wrestled with his pillow a while. Then the alarm went off. The rest was simple. At breakfast, he told her he was taking the day off. "Darling, why on earth?" "We're moving," he said. "But why?" "There was an explosion in the night. I think it was gas escaping." "We might have died," she cried. Ernie closed his eyes. "Go look in the hall, dear, and tell me what you see." When she returned, she was in a quandary. "Well," he asked, "did you see that crazy extra door blown off the wall?" "No, Ernie, but there's a man at the door in pyjamas like yours who claims he's been following you." Ernie squinted. "Who is he?" "He says his name is Irvin." "Irvin?" Ernie barked. "And dear, he's the spitting image of you." If you're enjoying the stories, hit the like button to help the channel continue to grow. Thanks. Two Worlds for One by George O. Smith. Narrated by William Skye. Without preamble, the door swung open with a rush and a man ran into the office. He was waving a paper in one hand, but this was not the only evidence of his excitement. Aside from the waved paper and his obviously breathless appearance, the man spoke as soon as he was within sight of the other man behind the desk. "Professor Milton has resigned." The man behind the desk smiled resignedly. "Don't be too concerned, Dr. Harris. Professor Milton has resigned before. He always comes back." Dr. Harris shook his head. His agitation did not diminish despite the calm composure of the man behind the desk. "Dr. Edwards," he explained, "you don't really understand. "Look, Harris," replied Dr. Edwards, dropping the formality of title. "Is there anything we can do about it?" "No," admitted Harris uncomfortably. "But you don't know what he'll be doing next." He handed the paper to the quiet man behind the desk. Dr. Edwards read, "Dear Dr. Edwards, it has come to my attention that the world is in a high state of confusion. Under these trying circumstances, I feel moved to do something constructive about it. You will understand that any honest attempt to eliminate the state of strife that exists is most difficult under my present affiliations with this institution. Ergo, I make formal resignation, knowing that a request for even a brief leave of absence would not be granted. Have no lasting fear. I may return once I have accomplished the reinstatement of peace and quiet in this troubled world. Sincerely yours, Paul Monroe Milton, Ph.D. Dr. Edwards shrugged. "This time it is the state of the world," he said. His voice held a twinge of amusement. Harris gasped. "You're not really worried?" "Of course not. There is no single man on earth capable of untangling the mess of the century." "I wonder," objected Harris. "Why?" "Professor Milton is a literal-minded genius and a bit of a screwball. A more brilliant man has seldom existed on this earth, but he reminds me somewhat of a powerful machine running wild. Neither he nor a machine has much judgment." "But what are you worried about?" "Remember the time he said nothing is impossible and was instantly told to try scratching a match on a bar of soap?" Edwards laughed heartily. "You bet," he chuckled. "Milton invented a safety match that would light only when scratched on a soft, moist bar of soap. Nowhere else." "Uh-huh," drawled Harris. "And a bit of common sense added to that kind of genius might have brought forth a real safety match that might be worth millions to the institution. What I'm a bit worried about is just what angle his rather literal mind will follow." No matter. We can stop him once we know, and Professor Milton is not an unknown figure. We'll wait and watch carefully." Dr. Harris nodded slowly. He was sensible enough to know that the professor was missing completely, and no matter how dangerous it might be, nothing could be done until Professor Milton did something to smoke himself out into the open. He left Dr. Edwards's office determined to keep a close eye on newspaper and a sharp ear on the radio commentators. The General Assembly of the United Nations came to order after prolonged applause. The chairman nodded genially and spoke into the microphones on his desk. His words were translated for those who did not understand his tongue, but no man present was unaware of the importance of the figure beside him. Pictures have no tongue, and Professor Milton was genius. "Gentlemen," said the chairman, "this may seem irregular. However, Professor Milton comes before us to explain a plan he has evolved for the continued peace and satisfaction of the world. A world made desperate by continued disagreement. We need no previews of his plan because we know that Milton seldom presents any solution that is not workable. I relinquish the rostrum to Professor Paul Monroe Milton." More thunderous applause. "Gentlemen of the United Nations," said Milton into the microphones, "it is not my purpose to decide who is right in these everlasting disagreements. Without a doubt, each side has its own personal reasons for believing as it does, otherwise there would be no disagreement. However, it stands that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics wants to rule a certain part of the world in their own manner, which is anathema to the United States of America. Similarly, the United States of America prefers to see the world operating under a manner favorable to its principles of democracy. Because of this, no agreement has been reached. An impasse has obtained for years. My plan is simple. Let us divide the world into 2 equal parts and each go our way, ruling each according to our own ideals. I offer you 2 worlds for 1. Professor Milton seated himself. The General Assembly was quiet for a moment. Then all broke into a roar of scornful laughter. Minutes later, the chairman succeeded in restoring order. He said, "I fear that Professor Milton does not quite understand. My dear Professor Milton, we agree in the whole. The main argument is not that we should do this. The question at hand is how to get along after the world is divided." "Simple," said the professor. "It is—" He was interrupted by more roars of laughter. "Fools! Idiots!" he stormed. The power of his voice stilled the laughter. "You think it will not work?" More laughter and an undercurrent of remarks like, "Choose up sides like a ball game. Make it cricket, old chap. Match you for the Dardanelles, Commissar. Swap your Java for—" "Imbeciles!" yelled Professor Milton angrily. "Must I demonstrate?" "Just how do you propose to effect this division?" asked the chairman sarcastically. "By application of gravitic field theory," snapped Professor Milton. The Russian delegate arose, was recognized, and said, "Professor Milton's suggestion sounds uncomfortable. I fully believe that no one will find fault with Russia if I exercise my power of veto on this suggestion." He seated himself among wild cheers, laughter, and applause. In the excitement, Professor Milton left. Charles Ingalls of the FBI smiled tolerantly. "I see no reason to be upset," he said. Doctors Edwards and Harris shook their heads in unison. "You don't understand," explained Edwards. "Recall his words?" "Of course." "And you apply no importance to them?" "His theory sounds reasonable. Let Russia run her section." Harris snorted excitedly. He slapped the newspaper with the back of his hand. "Divide the world?" he said, his voice rising in pitch. "Have you any idea of what that would mean?" "Why, it still sounds sensible." "Professor Milton is literal-minded to the extreme. Professor Milton is sheer genius. That is why he is employed in our institution." "Then," snapped Ingalls, "why don't you keep him there?" "We'd like to. The trouble is that Milton is genius, and as such quite important to certain factions. His ability to solve problems hitherto unsolvable makes him valuable. One of the problems he has encountered and solved is the way to leave our institution at any time. That is why we treat him as an employee instead of an inmate." "So, about this dividing business." Harris shook his head. "When Milton said divide the world into two parts, he meant that literally. He is quite capable of devising some means of dividing the world astronomically." Ingalls laughed. "Impossible," he chuckled. "Several years ago, Professor Milton was in need of some dye for some obscure purpose. One of his assistants made a wisecrack to the effect that if Professor Milton was so smart, why couldn't he filter the dye out of ink and use that? Milton devised a filter capable of separating the dye from ink and used it. So far, the filter is useless for anything else, but it will certainly remove the colour from a bottle of ink, leaving the stuff in two useless quantities." "Interesting, but astronomically, the idea of separating the world into two hemispheres is disastrous." "Why?" asked Ingalls. "I know little of astrology." Edwards glared at him. "Not astrology, astronomy. Astrophysics or celestial mechanics. Your half-apple of a world is unstable astronomically. Gravity would set in unfavourably upon the instant of division and separation, and the half-apple would collapse into two smaller spheres, gradually assuming true spherical shapes in thousands of years as the rock's cold flowed. But for the moment, the shock and the immediate crack-up would leave no city standing. Huge crevices would be formed, and no living thing to remain. Understand, I'm a doctor of medicine and not an astrophysicist. My description may err, but I can guarantee that the results would be disastrous. I suggest that if you don't believe me, call one of the big brains at Mount Palomar. They'll tell you the details." "It sounds impossible. But if the man is a maniac—" "Not a maniac," objected Dr. Harris. "Just completely single-track literal-minded. Genius without judgment. Cares nothing for any problem that has not caught his fancy, but will pursue anything he likes to the bitter end. Trying to keep up with what he fancies is like predicting which way a bar of bath soap will squirt when you step on it inadvertently. He's—" "Enough. Convinced or not, I'll aid you to recollect the professor. How shall we go about it?" "You're the manhunter," said Edwards with a smile. "How do you go about it?" "Just what kind of thing will this mad genius use to divide the earth?" asked Ingalls. "Lord knows," grunted Harris. "Why?" "I was suggesting that we keep watch over the sale of certain materials." "Make it a watch over all materials," snorted Edwards. "Field theory is an abstract subject, and he'll try to reduce it to practice, I'd guess. Mechanical division is impossible, I'd state flatly. Gravity holds the Earth together. Slicing it would do no good, for it would cold pressure weld together once the knife passed. But with some sort of field to divide and direct the forces of gravity, well, your guess is as good as mine. Fine, said Ingalls sourly. So we have the job of locating one man in the Earth who might be capable of ruining it, but we don't know how. He snorted. Could one man do it? We're here because we think so. He's done some mighty impossible things so far. Few of them are known for security reasons. Actually, though it is not admitted, Professor Milton is the man whose calculations made the original uranium pile practical. He took theory and reduced theoretical equations to practical calculations before they tried it out at the University of Chicago. It was some of his calculations that, stolen of course, put the rocket experts on the track of developing the V2. So... I begin to see. Professor Moreko of the Moscow Academy of Science shook his head heavily. Ridiculous, he said in a good grade of English into the telephone. Ridiculous, my comrade. No earthquake fault lines exist there. Ingalls, on the other end of the telephone, said, We know that, but that is where we anticipate trouble. What manner of trouble? You do not expect... I have called every seismographic station on Earth, explained Ingalls. Or I should say that I am calling every station. Professor Milton... the great Professor Milton. He is... Loose again, grunted Ingalls. With what purpose? Professor Milton has decided to divide the Earth so that Russia can run her half while we... Divide the Earth? Exploded Professor Moreko loudly, nearly damaging the telephone earpiece and Ingalls' ear at the same time. You Americans! He is yours! I will help, but you must stop him. Okay, replied Ingalls. Just keep an eye on the district I mentioned. According to the big globe here, that is the best place to divide the world so that each of us can have an equitable half. And a precious lot it will do us, snorted Moreko. What a completely outrageous idea. Well, I'm told he is the guy to do it. Moreko spluttered for a moment. Then his voice became sober. Had any other man on Earth made that statement, I would have scoffed, he said. But Professor Milton... American, I am alarmed. The connection was broken as the Russian hung up in an excited mood. Days passed. Days in which men pored over shipping statements, pondering their relative importance and seeking some clue of strange shipments to a strange location. A huge airliner was stolen. The seismographs of the world were still, save for their usual reportings. For 3 days, all radio was killed by energetic cracklings of static, which appeared to be completely non-directional in source. The Department of Terrestrial Magnetism in Washington reported shiftings of the lines of equal deviation from true north and a change in the vertical component as well, but their measurements were insufficiently precise to pin the source of trouble down to more than several thousand square miles. 20 days after the professor had resigned from the institution, all the world's seismographs reported a serious tremblor. Directionally, it was tracked down, and the calculations indicated a fairly straight line of fault. The fault was a vertical great circle of the Earth, dividing the Earth into 2 hemispheres. Somewhere along this great circle must be Professor Milton, reasoned the many agencies seeking him. They beat the circle from pole to pole, and though finding one man in the wilderness of Earth might be impossible, Every available man was seeking him actively. Locating Milton was inevitable, providing Milton did not accomplish his division of the earth first. 10 days later, the earth shook again, and people looked at one another in fear. "We must find him," stormed Ingalls. Edwards and Harris nodded unhappily. Edwards added, "He's down there somewhere." Ingalls looked out of the plane window at 1,000,000 square miles of glaring ice. "A moat in the Grand Canyon of the Colorado," he grunted. Professor Moreko shook his head. "All Americans are crazy," he stated. "No," grunted Edwards. "Only some of them." Moreko laughed bitterly. Days upon end of flying over the ice was tiring to them all. It was, however, only a matter of time before the elusive Professor Milton was located, and hours later Moreko gave a shout as he pointed towards a small building squat upon the ice with a tall steel tower beside it. They landed beside the building and climbed out of the plane worriedly. Whether the professor was armed bothered them quite a bit. Professor Milton was not armed, nor was he resentful at being found. "Greetings," he boomed genially. "You are the first." "Why did you hide?" demanded Edwards. "Hide? I was not hiding. I merely came to the proper place for the division of the earth. I'd have mentioned it, but apparently no one was interested. I was forced to go on my own, so to speak." "You realize the importance of this?" "Of course," smiled Professor Milton whimsically. "Once this division takes place, there will be no cause for argument." "Nor anybody to argue," pointed Edwards. "Small matter. Russia wants—" "Might I speak for Russia?" asked Professor Moreko. "Ah, Moreko. So glad to see you. Of course you may speak." "Professor Milton, I tell you that neither Russia nor the United States is pleased with this proposition of yours." "Why not?" asked Milton childishly. "It seems equitable." "It is equitable, but truly not practical." "No?" boomed Milton, reaching for a large lever protruding from a panel. "I shall show you. "Please consider first," objected Moreko.
"But why? Your ideology is at cross purposes with ours. You go your way, and we'll go ours."
"Dead!" snapped Moreko.
"Better dead," replied Milton, "than constant strife."
"You realize that you will kill every man on Earth?"
"Not at all, just a few. The others will find life difficult for a bit, but most will survive."
"But—" Milton stood to his full height, which was imposing.
"I care little for that," he boomed. "I am laughed at. I am made a fool of. I am ridiculed. I am told that my theories are impossible. I shall show them all, though they die in the attempt."
"And you yourself?"
"And if we do, it will prove my theories sound. Russia and the United States may each have their half, separated by millions of miles of space where neither can harm the other."
"It will not work," said Moreko. Edwards and Harris groaned. Telling Professor Milton that something will not work was the best way to urge him on. Professor Milton sat down with a superiorly tolerant smile.
"I shall give you 5 minutes," he told the Russian. "If you prove this impossible, I will desist with but a formal apology from those doubting Thomases."
"Clip him," snapped Ingalls, pointing a revolver at the professor. Professor Milton smiled.
"Field theory," he told Ingalls. "Pull the trigger and see what happens."
Ingalls grunted, pointed the pistol at the wall, and fired. The explosion was but a piffling one, more of a slow burn than a sharp bang. The bullet oozed from the end of the barrel and fell to the floor with a thud. Ingalls pulled a blackjack from his pocket and started forward, lifting it. Then he stopped. Moving the sap was difficult, like trying to swing a sledge under water.
"All metals encounter resistive fields here," said Professor Milton.
"At him bare-handed, then," snapped Ingalls.
"Wait," said Moreko.
"The world need not lose a brilliant brain. Once I have convinced him of the fallacy, he will forget this entirely."
"Fallacy?" snapped Milton angrily. "You think I cannot divide the world?"
Moreko smiled. "No, my esteemed colleague, I know you can divide the world. That all the earth grants. The earth does not want itself divided."
"Even to eliminate trouble?"
"If I prove to you that the trouble will not be eliminated, then will you forget this venture?"
"Yes, but it is the only way."
Moreko nodded. "I presume that you have set up a plane of cleavage through the earth. One, say, that will divide the earth and also screen the gravitic attraction of each half for the other so that centrifugal force will cause the two halves to separate."
"Yes."
"Then, once separated by several millions of miles, you believe that no arguments can ensue?"
"Yes."
"Because you think that neither of us can get at the other to do harm?"
"Yes,"
replied Milton. "But, Professor," smiled the Russian, "may I point out that in this equipment, in this generator of some hitherto unknown field of force, you have developed the means of interplanetary travel?"
"Perhaps."
"Now then," said Moreko, "if you must demonstrate your power, divide the moon. But remember that separating the Earth into two parts generates interplanetary strife instead of mere global argument. Have I answered your problem?" Things are less troublesome now. A bit of impending disaster will draw people together. It is often a sorry fact that once the disaster is averted, those people will again revert to their former animosity. But all that the people of the earth have to do to remember is to look upwards. There are 2 moons in the sky, moons once hemispherical, but whose edges daily crumble into crude spheres. A nice reminder, and also another problem for Professor Milton. He has not yet returned to his institution, for he is living in a glass dome on one of the moons, trying to work out the problem of bringing them together again. He claims it to be but a matter of time.
Remember to hit the like button. It really helps the channel. Thanks.
Laboratory by Jerome Bixby. Narrated by William Skye. Trying to keep a supercolossal laboratory invisible when 2 curious aliens are poking around can be a trying affair for even the most brilliant of minds. Gop's thoughts had the bluish-purple tint of abject apology.
"They're landing, Master."
Pud looked up from the tiny thig field he had been shaping in his tentacles. "Of course they are," he thought snapped. "You practically invited them down, didn't you? If you'd only kept a few eyes on the detector instead of daydreaming."
"I'm sorry," Gop said unhappily. I wasn't daydreaming. I was observing the magnificent skill and finesse with which you shaped the Thig. After all, this system is so isolated. No one ever came along before. I just supposed no one ever would. A scientist isn't supposed to suppose. Until he's proven wrong, he's supposed to know. 30 of Pud's eyes glowered upward at the tiny alien spaceship, only 90 or so miles above the surface of the laboratory planet, and lowering rapidly. The rest of Pud's eyes, more than 100 of them, set haphazardly in his various-sized heads like girth seeds on rolls, scoured every inch of the planet's visible surface to make certain that no sign of the Vegan's presence on the planet, from the tiniest experiment to the gigantic servo-mechanical eating pits, was left operating or visible. Irritatedly, he squelched out of existence a Yim field that had taken 3 weeks of laborious psycho-induction to develop. His psychokineticate stripped it of cohesion, and its faint whine and crackle vanished. I told you to deactivate all our experiments, he snapped at Gop. Don't you understand, Vegan? Abashed, the junior scientist lowered his many eyes. I'm sorry, Gop said humbly. I thought the Yim might wait until the creatures landed, Master. Perhaps their auditory apparatus would not have been sufficient to reveal its presence to them, in which case the field would not have had to be. All right, Pud grunted. I appreciate your point, but dripping mouthfuls. You know that any risk of detection is too great. You know the regulations on contact? Yes, Master. Speaking of which, part of your 7th head is showing. The junior scientist included the head in the personal invisibility field which he himself was broadcasting. Of all the suns in this sector, Pud thought, eyeing the little spaceship, and of all the planets around this particular sun, they have to choose this one to land on. Chew! Gop flushed. A member of the transverse colon revivalists, he found Pud's constant atheistic swearing very disturbing. He sighed inwardly. Usually at least one of Pud's heads could manage to keep its sense of humour, but right now all of them were like proton storms. The senior scientist was on the verge of one of his totalitantrums. They must have sighted flashes from our experiments, Pud went on, before you decided you could spare just one set of eyes for the detector. Though both Vegans were invisible to other eyes, they remained visible to each other because their eyes were adjusted to the wavelength of their invisibility fields. By the same token, they could see all their invisible experiments, a vast litter of gadgets, gizmos, gargantuan gimmicks, shining tools, huge and infinitesimal instruments, stacks of supplies and various types of energy fields, the latter all frozen in mid-activity like smudges on a pane of glass. The sandy ground was the floor of the Vegan's laboratory. Small hills and outcroppings of rock were their chairs and workbenches. Like a spaceship junkyard or an enormous open-air machinery warehouse, the laboratory stretched away from the two scientists in every direction to the planetoid's near horizon. Pud intensified the general invisibility field to the last notch, and the invisible experiments became even more invisible. The Thig field was a nameless coloured whirl of energy in the senior scientist's tentacles. In his concern for the other experiments, he had forgotten to deactivate it. It grew eagerly to the size of a backyard, then of a baseball diamond, then of a traffic oval, and one shimmering edge of it touched his body which he had not insulated. Energy crackled. Pud jumped 40 feet into the air, swearing, and slapped the field into non-existence between two tentacles. His body, big as an apartment house, floated slowly downward in the laboratory planet's light gravity. The tiny alien spaceship touched the ground just as he did. The rocket flare flickered and died. The ship sat on its fins, about 30 feet, Vegan feet, away. In its shining side, a few Vegan inches above the still smoking rocket tubes, was a small black hole. "Master, look," Gop thought. "Their ship is damaged. Perhaps that's why they landed." And he started to extend a tentative extrasensory probe through the hole. Pud lashed out with a probe of his own, knocking Gop's aside before it could enter the hole. "Nincompoop! Don't go esprobing until we know if they're sensitive to it or not. Can't you remember the regulations on contact for just 1 minute?" The tiny spaceship sat silently while its occupants evidently studied the lay of the land. Small turrets halfway up its sides twitched this way and that, pointing popgun armament. Pud inspected the weapons extrasensorily and thought an amused snort. The things tossed a simple hydrogen-helium pellet for a short distance. Gop, nursing a walloping headache as a result of Pud's rough counterprobe, thought sourly to himself, "I try to save the Yim, that's wrong. He forgets to deactivate the Thig, that's all right. I esprobe, that's wrong. He esprobes, that's all right." At last, "They're getting out," Gop observed. A tiny airlock had opened in the side of the ship. A metal ladder poked out, swung down, settled against the ground. The aliens, 2 of them, appeared, looked down, looked up, looked to the right and to the left. Then they came warily down the ladder. For a few minutes the giant Vegans watched the creatures wander about. One of them approached one of Pud's tails. Irritatedly, Pud lifted it out of the way. The little creature snooped on, unaware that 20 tons of invisible silicoid flesh hung over its head. Pud curled the tail close to him, and did likewise with all his other tails. "You'd better do the same," he advised Gop, his thought tone peevish. Silently, Gop drew in his tails. One unwise move, he knew, and the senior scientist would start thinking in roars. One of Gop's tails scraped slightly against a huge boulder. The scales made a tractor-on-gravel sound. Pud thought in roars. The tiny creature had stopped and was turning its helmeted head this way and that, as if trying to see where the sound had come from. It had drawn a weapon of some sort from a holster at its belt, another thermonuclear popgun. The creature turned and came back toward the Vegans, heading for his ship. Pud lifted his tail again. The creature passed under it, reached the ship, joined its partner. "I heard it too, Johnny," Helen Gorman said nervously. "A loud scraping noise." "It seemed to come from right behind me," Johnny Gorman said. "Damn near scared me off the planet. I thought it was a rock slide. Or the biggest critter in creation sneaking up on me. I couldn't see anything, though. Could you?" "No." Johnny stood there, blaster in hand, looking around, eyes sharp behind his faceplate. He saw nothing but flat, greyish-red ground, a scattering of stone outcroppings, large and small. Nothing but the star-clouded black of space above the near horizon, and the small sun of the system riding a low hillock like a beacon. "Blue light," he said thoughtfully. "Green light, red and purple light, and a mess of crazy colours we never saw before. Whatever those flashes were, honey, they looked artificial to me." Helen frowned. We were pretty far off-world when we saw them, Johnny. Maybe they were aurorae or reflections from mineral pockets. Or magnetic phenomena of some kind. That could be why the ship didn't handle right during landing. Johnny studied the upside-down dials on the protruding chestboard of his spacesuit. No neon in the atmosphere, he said. Darned little argon or any other inert gas. The only large mineral deposits within 50 miles are straight down. And this clod's about as magnetic as an onion. He gave the surrounding bleak terrain another narrow-eyed scrutiny. I suppose it could have been some kind of aurora, though. It's gone now, and there isn't a sign of anything that could have produced such a rumpus. He looked around again, then sighed and finally holstered his blaster. Guess I'm the worrying type, hon. Nothing alive around here. I wonder what that sound was. Probably a rock falling. This area's been undisturbed for God knows how many million years. The jolt of our landing just shook things up a little. He grinned a little sheepishly. As for the landing, I was so scared after that meteor hit us, it's a wonder I didn't nail the ship halfway into the planet instead of just jolting us up. Helen looked up at the 3-foot hole in the side of the ship. Johnny followed her gaze and grunted. We'd better get to work. He turned to the ladder that led up to the airlock. I'll rig the compressor to charge the spare oxy tanks. We'll have to delouse this air of ammonia, but otherwise it's fine. Look, honey, I won't need any help. Why don't you get busy on a PC? Helen nodded, still staring up at the meteor hole. You know, she said slowly, it wouldn't happen again this way in a million years, Johnny. Thank God this clod was here. We ought to name it Lifesaver. Yeah, sure, Johnny said ironically. It'll save our lives. Only thing is, it got us into this mess in the first place. He started up the ladder using only his arms, legs trailing. Helen got down on hands and knees and began poking around for the 24 or so samples needed for standard planetary classification. Bits of rock, air, vegetable growth, dust. The dust was very important. All went into vac containers at her belt. Then suddenly she said, oof, and reared back on her knees and clapped both hands to her helmet. Her eyes squeezed shut behind her faceplate, then opened wide and frightened. By the time her hands reached her helmet, Johnny had his blaster out and was floating toward the ground, looking around for something to shoot at. His boots touched, and 2 long, light gravity steps brought him to her side. Pud had been leaning over the tiny spaceship, one of his faces only feet above the little creatures. Gop's thought came, what are they? Fanged if I know. Bipeds. Never saw such little ones. Pud adjusted several eyes to a certain wavelength and studied the creatures through their spacesuits. He gave Gop a thought nod. Mammals. Bisexual. They're probably mates. It's a miracle they didn't land right in the middle of one of our experiments. That brought back Pud's ill temper. Miracle? Didn't you see me give this cosmic kiddie car of theirs a couple of psychokinetic clouts so they'd land where they did? The senior scientist glared around at their 1001 experiments, and then down at the little spaceship, smaller than the smallest of them, squatting on toy fins. He curled a tentacle as if wishing he could swat it. Gop knew, however, that despite Pud's irritation at having his work interrupted, he was just a little intrigued by the aliens. no matter how insignificant they were animate life of some intelligence, and Pud must be wondering about them. Gop thought it might be a good idea to dwell on that, in order to keep Pud from getting his heads in an uproar again. "Can you get into their thoughts?" he inquired. "I haven't tried. I don't think I could keep my potential down to their level." "Wonder where they're from." "Who cares?" Pud snorted. "I just wish they'd go away." Gop noted, though, that Pud's heads were lowering closer over the creatures. "They're nowhere near acceptable contact level, are they?" Gop said after a moment. "From their appearance, I'd say they're even beneath classification. Reaction motor in their ship, primitive weapons, protective garment. They can't even adjust physically to hostile environments." A minute passed. Pud said, Well, I think I will see what I can read, just to have something to talk about at the Scientists' Club." He sent out a tentative probe, a little one, just enough to register in one of his brains the total conscious content of one of the little creature's minds. He was afraid to go deeper, after the subconscious, though actually that was far more important. But deep probing would probably felt for what it was, while conscious probing was just a little painful. The creature popped erect in its squatting position and clapped its upper extremities to its head. The other one, which had been scrambling up the ladder to the ship's airlock, drew its pop gun and joined the first. "They're from some place called Earth," Pud said. "In the VLM-12XVA sector of this galaxy, as nearly as I can make out. They're an exploration team sent out by their planet to gather data on the nature of the physical universe." He paused to consult the third memory bank of his fifth brain, where he had impressed the content of the creature's mind. "They've had space travel for about 200 of their years. I translate that as about 11 of ours." He consulted again. "Highly materialistic, externally focused, very limited sensorium. An infant race chasing everything that moves round and round through their little three-dimensional universe. They've a long way to go." "What are they doing here?" Pud consulted again. "A routine exploration flight brought them to this system, and an almost unbelievable coincidence has served to delay them here. They dropped their meteor screens for just a moment, at just the wrong moment. A large meteor came along, entered the ship, and destroyed both their atmosphere manufacturing equipment and the large pressure tank of atmosphere which they kept as reserve in case the equipment should fail." He paused. "Mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. They can't live without it. At any rate, the ship was evacuated, and they barely had time to get into the, spacesuits, they call them, which they now wear. The accident left them with no atmosphere whatever except the small amount in the tanks of those suits. That will be exhausted in a short time. I gather that if this planet hadn't been here, they'd have been goners. As it stands, they plan to charge their spare suit tanks, which weren't harmed, with the air of this planet and then return to their Earth, subsisting on the tank's air, by hyperspatial drive." Again Pud paused. Well now, I'd overlooked that. So they have hyperspatial drive, at least, and after only 200 years of space travel. Perhaps they are worth a closer look." Pud lowered his head over the two little aliens who were moving warily, popguns drawn, away from the ship. "Pud," Gop said nervously. "What?" "One of them is crawling toward the time warp." "Well, don't tell me about it. Lift the warp out of the way." Gop extended a tentacle, first reconstituting it on the 7th atomic sublevel so he wouldn't get it blown off, and gently picked up the time warp. It looked like a blue-violet frozen haze in his grasp. He set it down on the other side of the spaceship, anchoring it again to now so it wouldn't go flapping off along the time continuum. "So they didn't land because they saw flashes from our experiments," he said a little triumphantly. One of Pud's heads turned and gave the junior scientist an acid look, while the others continued to observe the aliens. "They lowered their meteor screens," he said nastily, "thus bringing about this entire bother, because they wanted to get a better look at the flashes." Gop was silent, but he thought acidly, "That's what you say. You won't let me esprobe, and when you do, you manage to prove it's all my fault." Johnny Gorman had just said to Helen, "I want to chip a few samples off that outcropping over there. Come on, hon." He started toward the ridge of grey-black rock. Helen followed on his heels. "Aspirin," she said, deliberately falsetto, and her helmet valet fed her another pill with a sip of water. "Then we'll go back and stick inside the ship until the tanks are charged," Johnny went on, a little grimly. "I think we're just edgy. Planets don't give people headaches, and there's nothing alive within 1,000,000 miles of this dust ball." He hefted his blaster, which he had adjusted to wide field. "But just in case." "Pud," Gop said, still more nervously. "Yes, I see, you idiot. Lift the Tharn field out of their way. I'll take care of the space warp generator." The giant Vegans, for all their bulk, moved soundlessly and at great speed until they were between the aliens and the stone outcropping toward which they appeared to be heading. Gop extended a tentacle, curled it at an odd angle, and picked up the shimmering Tharn field, which was the Vegans' reservoir of basic universal energy. Set in any energy matrix, Tharn became that energy, added to any existing energy, Tharn augmented it to any desired potential. Thus it was extremely valuable to their experiments, and very risky stuff to handle as well. Gingerly, Gop set the Tharn down beyond the outcropping. At the same time, he picked up several instruments that lay nearby, an electron wrench, a snurling iron, a plots meter, several pencil rays. He placed them on the ground beside the Tharn. Pud had curled 12 tentacles around the space warp generator. It was as big as a city block and heavy even in light gravity. He puffed a thought at Gop. "Give me a tentacle." Gop helped his master place the generator safely on the other side of the ridge. Johnny Gorman banged off a handful of rock and shoved it into the vac container at his belt. "Okay, hon," he said. "Let's go." They stood one more moment atop the ridge, looking out over the barren, rusty grey plain that the ridge had until now concealed from their gaze. "Looks just as dead as the rest," Johnny observed. "I guess we were just jumpy over nothing." He turned to start down the slope. "Come on." In 3 long, light gravity steps, he had reached the bottom and turned to steady Helen. She wasn't there. She had tripped and tumbled off the other side of the ridge. He could hear her screaming. "Putrefied proteins!" Pud roared. "Help me get it out of the Tharn!" The 2 Vegans leaned over the ridge. While Gop forced the writhing folds of the Tharn field apart with 2 reconstituted tentacles, Pud reached in, plucked the little alien out, and set it upright. It immediately scrabbled up the side of the ridge as fast as it could, and joined its mate, which had bounded up the other side. "Now look at what you've done," Pud raged. "What about the rules on contact? The examiners will get this out of us when we report on our projects. Mountains of bytes, we've revealed ourselves." "Not really, Master," Gop said, rushing his thoughts. "All the creature will know is that it tumbled into the field and then was somehow ejected by it. A trick of gravity, perhaps. A magnetic vortex. It won't know what really happened." "That field was supposed to be turned off," Pud said, every one of his faces green with rage. You are a stupid, clumsy, few-headed piece of provender." Gop flushed clear down to his tails. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't think of everything at once. I must have accidentally activated the Tharn when I moved it. I'm sorry." Pud clapped a tentacle to his prime forehead. "What next?" he moaned. "Oh, Johnny," Helen sobbed. "I tripped when I started to turn around and fell down the other side, and all of a sudden, it was horrible. I thought I was going crazy." Johnny Gorman had his arms tight around her. Behind her back, his blaster was pointed straight down the far slope of the ridge, ready to atomize anything that moved. "What, honey?" he said. "What happened? I didn't see anything near you. What happened?" "It was like I was in a hurricane. I couldn't see anything, but something seemed to be whirling around me, something as big as the universe. And it seemed to be whirling inside me, too. I felt... It felt like... Johnny, I was crossed." "Crossed?" He shook her gently. "What do you mean you were crossed?" "It felt like my right side was my left side, and my heart was beating backwards, and my eyes were looking at each other, and I was just twisted all downside up, outside, and inside out, upside, and... Johnny," she wailed, "I am going crazy." "Oh, no, you're not," he said grimly. "You're going back to the ship. I don't know what gives with this creepy clod, but I know we're not moving an inch outside the ship until we blast off. Come on." "They're crawling back toward their ship, Pud. Look out! They're heading for the dimensional warp." Pud extended a tentacle 90 feet and slapped the dimensional warp out of the path of the scurrying creatures. The warp bounced silently on the rocky ground, caromed like a fireball from boulder to boulder, encountered stray radiation from the Tharn field that still glowed invisibly on the other side of the ridge, and became activated. It emitted concentric spheres of nameless coloured energy and a vast snapping and crackling. "There," Gop thought triumphantly at Pud. "That's just what I did with the Tharn field. I guess nobody is above accidents, eh?" Pud thought pure vitamins at his junior scientist. "You idiot! I didn't accidentally turn on the warp. You left the Tharn on and it triggered the warp. Why didn't you deactivate the Tharn?" "Why didn't you?" Gop shot back. "You were there too." Pud lashed a tentacle over the outcropping, and the Tharn field became inactive. Then he looked around, and every eye in his prime head popped. "Look out! The dimensional warp is spreading! It's lost its cohesion! Oh, digestion! They're in that now!" Johnny and Helen Gorman were in a universe of blazing stars and nebulae that whirled like cosmic carousels, of gas clouds that seethed in giant turbulence. It was the universe of creation, or a universe in its death throes. "Johnny!" "Helen!" The boiling universe exploded away from them in soundless radiation in all directions, in 5 directions, their subconscious minds told them. It vanished into nothingness, a nothingness that surrounded them like white blindness. And then, suddenly, it was restored again, roiling, churning, flashing with the bright eyes of novae, shot with the sinuous streamers of rushing gas clouds, pulsing with the heartbeats of winking variables. And suddenly they were tumbling head over heels along the rocky ground of the little planetoid again.
"Johnny!
Ellen!"
"At least we got them out of that," Pud puffed. "The subtemporal field, Gop. Help me lift it. Hurry!"
"Master, all our experiments are activated. The Tharn radiated enough to activate everything."
"Help me lift the subtemporal field!"
"Master, it's too late. They're in it."
1,000,000 miles above their heads was the vast sweep of all time, like a rushing, glassy, upside-down river. They tumbled through a chaos where time, twice in each beat of their hearts, bounced back and forth between creation and entropy, and took them with it. Time was a torrent beneath whose surface they were yanked back and forth from beyond the end to before the beginning, like guppies on a deep-sea line. A torrent whose banks were dark eternity, and whose waters were the slippery substance of years.
"Johnny!
Ellen!" Pud deactivated the subtemporal field with a lash of a tentacle, and the 2 little aliens rolled from it like dice from a cup, gasping and wailing. Immediately they started running again toward their ship, dodging between the faint flickers of red, blue, green, scarlet, and nameless-colored light that marked the location of those experiments which, now activated and releasing their fantastic energies, defied even the invisibility fields that still surrounded them. The aliens brushed against another experimental field, and it twisted itself in 1/1,000,000th of a second into a 5th-dimensional topological monstrosity that would take weeks to untangle if it didn't explode first, for it bulged dangerously at the seams. Pud hastily back-tentacled the field into an interdimensional vortex where, if it did explode, it would disrupt an uninhabited universe so far down on the scale of subspaces that nobody would get hurt. Then the senior scientist gathered 10 tons of machinery in a tentacle and hoisted it while the creatures ran beneath. Gop was psychokinetic carrying 5 energy fields toward the sidelines, with another dozen or so wrapped in his tentacles. Pud silently dumped his load of machinery and reached for something else in the creature's path. But the creatures scurried erratically, stopping, dashing off in this direction, skidding to a halt as they saw something else to terrify them, and then dashing off in that direction, just as the Vegans had dealt with an obstacle to their progress in this direction.
"Pud! One of them fell through the intraspatial doorway to the other side of the planet." "Well, for the love of swallowing, reach through and get it! If those beasts see it, they'll tear it to pieces."
Helen Gorman faced something that was a cross between a tomcat and an eggplant on stilts. It looked hungry. It bounded toward her in 40-foot lopes.
"Johnny? Johnny, where are you?"
Helen fainted. Several other garage-sized beasts converged on her, all looking as hungry as the first. In reality, they weren't hungry. Their food consisted of stone primarily, while they also drew sustenance from cosmic radiation. But they liked to tear things to pieces. They were native to the planetoid. The vegan scientists had gathered them up and shoved them through the intraspatial doorway to this side of the planet, where they wouldn't be underfoot all the time. It was a one-way doorway through which Pud or Gop would occasionally reach to pluck one of the beasts back for use in experimentation. Now, just as the beast reached Helen Gorman, one of Gop's tentacles came through the doorway, followed by one of his smaller heads. The junior scientist picked up Helen and hastily extruded another tentacle from the first to bat aside one of the beasts that leaped after her. The part of the tentacle bearing Helen Gorman swished back through the doorway. The head and the rest of the tentacle followed. The beasts commenced fighting among themselves, which was what they did most of the time anyway. Gop, however, in his haste, had forgotten to repolarize the molecules of his body while retreating through the doorway, and the moment he cleared the doorway on the other side of the planet, the doorway reversed, still one way, but now the other way. And eventually one of the beasts, attracted by all the flickering and flashing and frantic scrabbling visible through the doorway, abandoned the fun of the fight and leaped like a 10-ton gopher through the opening. The others followed, naturally. They always chased and tore apart the first one to cut and run. Gop had just set Helen Gorman on the ground, and Johnny Gorman, seeing her apparently materialize from thin air and float downward, had just started to stagger toward her when the 10-ton gopher began to vivisect one of Pud's tails. The animal hadn't seen the tail, of course, it was invisible, but it had stumbled over it and been intrigued. Pud leaped 90 feet into the air, roaring out loud, not thought-roaring, and roaring with a dozen gigantic throats. The sound thundered and rolled and crashed and echoed from the low hills around. The beast fell off Pud's tail, bounced, looked around, and made for Johnny Gorman as the only visible moving object. Johnny's eyes were still bugging from the gargantuan roar he had just heard. He saw the beast and dodged frantically, just as Gop's invisible tentacle shot out to bowl the beast over. In dodging, Johnny tumbled into another energy field. He stood on his own face, saw before his eyes the hairy mole on the back of his neck, and threw a grey and red inside-out hand before his eyes in complete terror. Then Pud nudged him gently out of the field, and before Johnny's eyes, in an instantaneous and unfathomable convolution, the hand became normal again. About that time, the rest of the beasts emerged from the intraspatial doorway. While some of them continued the fight that had begun on the other side of the planet, others started for Johnny Gorman and for Helen, who was now sitting up weakly and shaking her head. A beast resembling a steam shovel on spider's legs rammed full tilt into a force field. The force field bounced 50 feet and merged with another field in silent but cataclysmic embrace, producing a subfield which converted 0.1% of all water within a 100-foot radius to alcohol. The effect on Johnny and Helen was instantaneous. They became drunk as hoot owls. Their eyes bleared and refused to focus. Their jaws sagged. Johnny stumbled and sat down hard. He and Helen stared dolefully at each other through their faceplates. Pud gave up every last hope of avoiding contact. He picked up Johnny with one tentacle and Helen with another and set them down on top of their spaceship, where there was just enough reasonably flat surface on the ship's snub nose to hold them. The beasts were chasing one another around and around through the wreckage of the laboratory. They romped and trampled over delicate machines, sent heavier equipment spinning to smash against boulders. They ran head-on into sizzling energy fields and, head-off, kept running. Pud grabbed up an armful of beasts, raced to the doorway, reversed it, and poured them through. He grabbed up more beasts, threw them after. Gop was busily engaged in the same task. Some of the beasts began fighting among themselves even as the Vegans held them. Gop jumped as one tore 6 cubic yards of flesh from a tentacle. He healed the tentacle immediately, then hardened it and all his other tentacles to the consistency of pig iron. He held back that particular beast from the lot. When the others had been tossed through, he hauled back his tentacle, wound up and pegged the offending beast with all his might. It streaked through the doorway like a projectile, legs and eye stalks rigid. Pud plucked a machine from the 2-foot claws of the very last beast and tossed the beast through. Then he examined the machine. It was beyond repair. He slammed that through the doorway too. In 10 seconds, the 2 vegan scientists had slapped and mauled all their rioting experiments into inaction. Silence descended over the battleground. Silence more nerve-shattering than the noise had been. Pud looked around at the remains of the laboratory, every face forest green with rage. Machines lay broken, tilted, flickering, whining, wheezing like the bodies of the wounded. Delicate instruments were smashed to bits. The involuted field that Pud had flung through the vortex had evidently burst, as he had feared, for the vortex had vanished. So probably had the universe the field had burst in. The 2 fields that had interlocked were ruined, each having contaminated the other beyond use. Other energy fields, having absorbed an excess of energy from the Tharn, were bloated monstrosities or burned-out husks. It would take weeks to get the place straightened up, even longer to replace the smashed equipment and restore the ruined fields. Many experiments in which time had been a factor would take months and in some cases years to duplicate. All that was bad enough. But worst of all, the little aliens had been contacted. Like it or not, the aliens knew that something was very much up on this planetoid. Like it or not, they'd report that, and more of their kind would come scurrying back to investigate. Pud groaned and studied the little creatures, who sat huddled together on the nose of the ship. Well, he thought sourly to Gop, here we are.
Yes, Master.
Do you think that from now on you'll watch the detector?
Oh, yes, Master, I will.
And do you think it matters a chew now if you do or not? Now that we've revealed ourselves? We have a choice, Pud said acidly. We can destroy these little aliens so they can't report what they've seen. That's out, of course. Or we can move our laboratories to another system, a formidable job, and food knows whether we'd ever find another planet so suited to our needs. And even if we did do that, and they found nothing when they returned here, they'd still know we were around somewhere.
They wouldn't know that we're around, Master.
They'd know something is around. Don't mince words with me, you idiot. You know that they've seen enough to draw the very conclusions we don't want them to draw. You know how vital it is that no race under contact-level status know of the existence of other intelligent races, particularly races far in advance of it. Such knowledge can alter the entire course of their development.
Yes, Master.
So what are we to do, eh? Here we are. And there, Pud motioned with a tentacle at the little aliens, they are. As you can see, we must reveal ourselves to still a greater extent. They can't even get into their ship to leave the planet without our help. Gop was silent. Also, Bud sent a brief extrasensory probe at the aliens, and both of them clutched at their helmeted heads. Their problem of air supply is critical. There is very little left in their suit tanks, and the time required for the machines to refine air from this planet's atmosphere has been wasted in the entertainment so recently concluded. At this moment they are resigned to death. Naturally, we must help them. He paused. Well, my brilliant, capable young junior nincompoop, any ideas on how we can help them and still keep our scientist status when the examiners get the story of this mess out of us? Yes, Master. I thought not. Pud continued his frowning scrutiny of the aliens for a moment. Then he looked up, his face blank. Eh? You do? Yes, Master. Well, great gobs of gulosity, what? Master, do you recall the time experiment that you wanted to try a few years ago? Do you recall that the idea appealed to you very much, but that you wanted an intelligent subject for it, so we could determine results by observing rational reactions? I recall it all right. My brave young junior scientist declined to be the subject, though Food knows you are hardly intelligent enough to qualify anyway. Yes, I remember, but what's that got to do with... Pud paused. The jaws of his secondary heads, which were more given to emotion, dropped. Then slowly his faces brightened, and his many eyes began to glow. Ah, he thought softly. You see, Master? I do indeed. If it works, we'll have no more problem. The examiners will be pleased at our ingenuity. The aliens will no longer... I see. All right. Let's try it. Pud reached down and picked one of the aliens off the nose of the ship. It slumped in his grasp immediately. The other alien began firing its pop gun frantically at the seemingly empty air through which its mate mysteriously rose. The thermonuclear bolts tickled Pud's hide. He sighed and relaxed his personal invisibility field and became visible. That didn't matter now. The alien stared upward. Its face whitened. It dropped its pop gun and fell over backward, slid gently off the ship's nose, and started a slow, light gravity fall toward the ground. Pud caught it and said, I thought that might happen. Evidently they lose consciousness rather easily at unaccustomed sights. A provincial trait. He slid the aliens gently into the airlock of their ship. The Vegans waited for the aliens to regain consciousness. Eventually one did. Immediately it dragged the other back from the lock into the body of the ship. A moment later, the lock closed. Now hold the ship, Pud told Gop, while I form the field. Flame flickered from the ship's lower end. It rose a few inches off the ground. Gop placed a tentacle on its nose and forced it down again. He waited while the ship throbbed and wobbled beneath the tentacle. Now, for the first time, Gop himself esprobed the aliens. He sent a gentle probe into one of their minds and blinked at the turmoil of terror and helplessness he found there. Faced with death at the hands of giant monsters, the aliens preferred to take off and die cleanly in space from asphyxiation or even by a mutual self-destruction pact that would provide less discomfort. Gop withdrew his probe, wondering that any intelligent creature could become sufficiently panicky to overlook the fact that if the monsters had wanted to kill them, they would be a dozen times dead already. Pud had shaped a time field of the type necessary to do the job. It was a pale green haze in his tentacles. He released the field, and under his direction it leaped to surround the spaceship, clinging to it like a soft cloak. As the Vegans watched, it seemed to melt into the metal and become a part of it. The whole ship glowed a soft, luminescent green. "Let it go," Pod said. Gop removed his tentacle. The ship rose on its flicker of flame, rose past the Vegans' enormous legs and tails, past their gigantic betentacled bodies, past their many necks and faces, rose over their heads. Gop sneezed as the flame brushed a face. And Pud began shaping a psychokinetic bolt in his prime brain. For this purpose he marshalled the resources of all his other brains as well, and every head except his prime one assumed an idiot stare. He said, "Now!" and loosed the bolt as a tight beam aimed at the ship and invested with 92 separate and carefully calculated phase motions. The ship froze 50 miles over their head. The flicker from its rocket tubes became a steady, motionless glow. Pud said, "Now!" again, and altered a number of the phase motions once, twice, 3 times, in an intricate pattern. The ship vanished. As one, the many heads of the Vegan scientists turned to stare at the point in the sky where they had first sighted the ship. There it was, coasting past the laboratory planet, tubes lifeless, coasting on the velocity that had brought it from the last star it had visited. There it was, just as it had been before the tiny aliens had sighted the flickerings that had caused them to relax their meteor screens. There it was, sent back in time to before all the day's frantic happenings had happened. Pud and Gop esprobed the distant aliens, and then looked at each other in complete satisfaction. "Fine," Pud said. "They don't remember a thing. Not a single elementary thing." He looked around them at the shambles of the laboratory. "It's a pity the experiment couldn't repair all this as well. Is everything turned off?" "Everything, Master." "No experiments operating, you nincompoop? No flashes?" "None, Master." "Then they should have no reason to land, you idiot." "You know," Pud said, "in a way it was rather a fortunate thing that they landed. It enabled me to perform a very interesting experiment. We have demonstrated that a creature returned through time along the third flood subcontinuum will not retain memory of the process or of what transpired between a particular point in time and one circular return to it. I'm glad you stimulated me to think of it. Best idea I ever had." Pud turned his attention to the ruins of the laboratory. He moved off, half his head agonizing over the destruction caused by today's encounter, the other half glowing at its satisfactory conclusion. Gop sighed and disprobed the little aliens for the last time, a final check to make certain that they remembered nothing. "Johnny, how about that little planet down there to the left?" "Let's drop the meteor screens for a better look." Hastily, Gop reached out and tapped the meteor aside. "Heck, that planet looks like a dud, all right. But it's 2 days to the next one, and I've got a terrific headache." "Funny, I've got one too." "Well, what say we land and stretch our—" By that time, Gop had hastily withdrawn his headache-causing probe. He stared anxiously upward. After a moment, he said, "They're landing, Master." Thanks for listening. For more stories like this, go over to the channel page. There are a huge amount of compilations just like this one, as well as author collections and mini anthologies. You can find them in the playlist section, along with hundreds of standalone stories to choose from. See you in the next one.